And our opening words this morning are by Amy Bowden Friedman. Once more, the earth has turned toward the light of the sun. As we are bathed in the light of a new day, so may we greet the dawning of fresh possibility. Once more, we awaken from our slumber. As our bodies rise to meet the challenges and pleasures of living, so may our hearts and minds open with promise. Once more, we gather for worship. As we join our voices in word and song, so may this assembly bring forth wholeness. Come, let us worship. Please join me in a spirit of prayer and meditation. After our spoken meditation and some time of silence, we will sing together Spirit of Life, which you can find in your order of service. This morning's meditation is by Nathan Walker, and he asks that it begin and end with the sound of the mindfulness bell. So that is how we will do this. Breathing in, I am aware of my pain. Breathing out, I am aware that I am not my pain. Breathing in, I am aware of my past. Breathing out, I am aware that I am not my past. Breathing in, I am aware of my anger. Breathing out, I am aware that I am not my anger. Breathing in, I am aware of my despair. Breathing out, I am aware that I am not my despair. Breathing in, I am aware of peace. Breathing out, I am aware that I am worthy of peace. Breathing in, I am aware of love. Breathing out, I am aware that I am worthy of love. Breathing in, I am aware of joy. Breathing out, I am aware that I am an agent of joy. Breathing in, I am aware of hope. Breathing out, I am aware that I am an agent of hope. Breathing in, I am aware. This morning's reading is by my colleague and friend James Ford. There is an ancient Chinese folk story that speaks to the deep desire for knowing who we are, for reconciliation and healing, and how this quest might look. Its origin is lost in the mists of time, but nonetheless it speaks to this calling of our hearts so clearly that for nearly 1,000 years it has been considered a Zen koan, an object for our deepest reflection. The story is called, Which is the True Chen? The story turns on two children raised together, Chen and Chao. They were cousins being raised by Chen's father, Chao's uncle. They were constant companions throughout their childhood. Chen's father, Ken, one day said to them, "You two are perfect together. When you grow up, you will be married." The children let these words soak into them and decided it was true. They were betrothed to one another. Unlike most childish thoughts that fade away like morning mists, they never wavered from their assumption that someday they would marry. Of course, life rarely goes as we expect, and as they grew into young adulthood, as was the custom of that ancient culture, Chang Kien arranged for Chen to be married to a wealthy merchant. The young couple was devastated. Chow decided he couldn't bear to see his beloved Chen wedded to someone else. He decided to leave home forever one night, about a week before the wedding. He acquired a boat, and when that night came, he set off down the river without a word to anyone. He wasn't gone more than 3 or 4 minutes when he heard Chen calling to him. Looking into the gloom, he saw her running down the bank of the river, her skirts rippling in the evening breeze. He pulled over. She climbed into the boat, and they sailed away together. They married and settled together in the province of Chu. After 6 happy years and the birth of 2 children, Chen said to her husband, "I have to go home and make peace with my father." Chow understood, feeling many of the same longings as his beloved, and agreed. So they arranged for the care of their children with friends and sailed back upstream to their old home. When they moored, Chen stayed in the boat while Chow went up to the house to ascertain what their reception would be. He knocked on the door, and Kien answered it. "Oh, how wonderful to see you," the old man exclaimed. "I've worried for years about you and what has happened to you." In violation of all cultural standards, he embraced the young man as if his long-lost son had returned home. Chow was embarrassed and replied, "Thank you, sir. I've missed you too, but I really didn't expect such a greeting." "Why not?" Kien asked. "I raised you as a son. I've missed you more than I can say. But since I ran away with Chen, I thought you would be terribly angry." The old man stepped back and stared at his nephew. "What are you talking about? Chen is here. The night you left, she went to bed and has been in a coma ever since. Of course, there was never a wedding. I've often thought that I should have let you two marry instead. Come." The two went into the house, and sure enough, in a darkened bedroom, there was Chen, terribly pale and obviously in a feverish sleep. "I don't know what to say, but I have to show you something," Chow said to his uncle. Together, the 2 men walked down toward the river. They were about halfway there when Chen appeared. She was flushed and walking fast. She seemed not to see the 2 men at all, but instead was looking at something behind them. They turned to see the other Chen, fevered and pale as silk, also walking rapidly toward the river. Frightened, Chow and Kien stood aside as the 2 Chens ran toward each other, embraced, and melted into one another, somehow becoming one person. The great 11th century Zen master, Wu-Tzu Fei-yen, took this traditional story and turned it into a koan, that object for meditation and conversation between Zen practitioners. Wu-Tzu asked, "The woman Chen and her spirit separated. Which is the true Chen?" Perhaps, writes James Ford, this is the question for all of us. It doesn't matter whether the question was formulated in the 11th century or yesterday. It is a question about and for all of us. For Chen, seeking her true self. For you and me, as we engage the great questions of life and death, hope and longing. Here we ask, who are we? Who am I? What is my true self? What is my true home? And how do I find it? In my previous job, I did a lot of guest preaching. I was at a different church every month. It was fun to see how different congregations worship, to meet new people, to reuse sermons. I remember one Sunday I was at an old Gothic-looking church on the South Shore. I had finished my sermon and was beelining for the coffee pot, as I do. This particular church interrupted coffee hour a lot with bells and announcements. I'm glad we don't do that here. And before I could get any coffee, I was stopped by a man who looked to be in about his 50s, who wanted to talk about the service. I don't remember what he had to say about my words, but I do remember what he had to say about his regular minister. She was okay, he said, but a little young. I smiled. This particular minister was about 10 years older than I am, so I found it interesting that the man would be complaining freely to me about her age. I mean, he said, she hasn't even read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Oh dear, I said, that is too bad. I made a mental note to put Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance on my reading list. In that moment, I related closely with my poor colleague who can't, in all fairness, be expected to have read every book under the sun that has been important to each of her parishioners. But I also related closely with this man, who was obviously yearning for his minister to have a deeper understanding of his worldview. And in his mind, a way for her to gain that would be to read a text that had been so foundational to him. Sometimes we long to be known at our very core, and our own words don't always suffice in expressing our own experiences and understandings. I remember taking my partner Lisa to my childhood home for the first time and waiting expectantly for a deepened understanding of who I was. See, I said, now you can understand. Understand what? She asked. Understand me, I said. I wanted her to have read the text of my childhood, the slanted floors and low ceilings of our 1820s home, the smallness of my bedroom, and the vastness of the woods behind the house. I wanted her to take in the clubhouse and the eaves and the tree forts in the yard, the seashells and beach glass on display in little bowls throughout the house, and the hanging plants bringing to life the indoors, books everywhere, framed pictures of loved ones on the mantle. And I wanted her to know me more deeply because of this encounter with my past. So I could relate to that man too. His book stayed on my reading list for years. I knew it was a sort of cult classic from the 70s, and so I guess it has been influential to more than that one man. But I didn't sit down to read it until this week. I'm glad I read it. I wouldn't exactly say that I connected with it the way he did. I found it a real slog, actually. And in my defense, I am not the only one who has felt that way either. In addition to selling 5 million copies, the book was also turned down by 121 publishers before finding a home at William Morrow and Company. It's a work of philosophical fiction in which the author explores his metaphysics of quality. If you can't follow the description, you should try following the book. I'd give you a spoiler alert now, but since I'm reading the 25th anniversary edition of the book, I'd say you've had enough time to have read it if you had wanted to. The book describes in first person a 17-day motorcycle journey from Minnesota to Northern California. The author is traveling with his son, Chris, and for the first 9 days of the trip with their friends John and Sylvia Sutherland. John and Sylvia only make it as far as Montana. The trip is punctuated by philosophical discussions, which the narrator calls chautauquas. The discussions are tied together by the story of the narrator's own past self, who is referred to in the third person as Phaedrus, after Plato's dialogue. Phaedrus, a teacher of creative and technical writing at a small college, became obsessed with what defines good or quality. We slowly learn that his philosophical investigations eventually drove him insane, and he was subjected to electroconvulsive therapy, which permanently changed his personality. The motorcycle journey brings the narrator into territory that is vaguely familiar, because he has been there in a past life as Phaedrus. Toward the end of the book, Phaedrus's personality begins to re-emerge, and the narrator is reconciled with his past. It reminds me a little of the story of Chen, when her two selves embrace and are unified. Throughout the book, the narrator takes impeccable care of his motorcycle and is perpetually annoyed by how his friend John doesn't take any interest in the mechanics of his bike. At each stop, the narrator tunes and adjusts his bike, paying great attention to each noise, each change in temperature and altitude along the route. To honor the bike, he argued, you must know each part and how it works. John disagrees. He puts his faith in an expensive motorcycle and wishes to simply experience the open road without taking any responsibility for it. The narrator calls this difference in outlook the classic romantic divide, and spends a lot of time explaining the merits of both ways of thinking. In one scene, he talks about the intricacies of his bike and how it works. He says, on this machine, I've done the tuning so many times, it's become a ritual. The engine has picked up a noise that sounds like a loose tappet, but could be something worse. So I'm going to tune it now and see if it goes away. Tappet adjustment has to be done with the engine cold, which means that wherever you park it for the night is where you work on it the next morning. A motorcycle functions entirely in accordance with the laws of reason, he says, and a study of the art of motorcycle maintenance is really a miniature study of the art of rationality itself. And yet, when he's tuning his motorcycle, he feels like he's in church, that he's performing a holy rite. In another scene, the narrator talks about the ride as a way to connect with the world around him. He contrasts the experience of riding a motorcycle with the experience of riding in a car. He says, on a cycle, the frame is gone. You're completely in contact with it all. You're in the scene, not just watching it anymore. And the sense of presence is overwhelming. That concrete whizzing by 5 inches below your foot is the real thing, the same stuff you walk on. It's right there, so blurred you can't focus on it, yet you can put your foot down and touch it at any time. And the whole thing, the whole experience, is never removed from immediate consciousness. Sifting through all of the philosophical language, I think I see what he's getting at. We're all torn between these two ways of being. Do we stay in the moment and experience life. Accept things as they are, eliminate judgment, and feel one with everything? Or do we parse life out, rationalize and analyze it? Do we study life so that we can experience and learn from our experiences, make better decisions next time, become expert? On the one side is Zen, on the other is motorcycle maintenance. It reminds me of that quote from E.B. White. I arise in the morning torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. To live fully, we need to be able to do both. But yes, that does make it awfully hard to plan the day. How do we reconcile our dual longings? How do we reconcile a broken heart? How do we find our way home? Who is the true Chen? Who am I? James Ford, whose story I read earlier from his book on Zen, says, as these questions tumble out of us, all our ancient longings are revealed. He references what he calls our astonishing ability to divide the world, to separate you and me, to assign good and evil to actions. And he says it is this ability and talent at dividing the world that has caused us to feel lost, to long for our true home. The truth isn't simple, he says. There is no return to the womb. There is no return to unconsciousness. We've come too far. So the question becomes, how do we return home without sacrificing our full humanity? Sometimes, he says, we have to wander far from home in order to really understand what home is. For some, the trip might be a motorcycle ride across the United States. For others, the journey is on a meditation cushion. James says in his case, he had to wander far from the spiritualities of the West in order to understand the truths contained in his childhood stories. And along the way, he's learned that his real home was never as narrow or constrained as he once thought it must be. I've thought a lot about the author of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance this week. He never mentioned his own name in the book, so I haven't mentioned it until now, but it's Robert Pirsig. I've been curious about what's become of him since his launch into fame. That doesn't always go so well for people. He must be 86 now, living privately. The last word I could find of him was from 2006, when he agreed to give an interview with Tim Adams of the Guardian newspaper. Pirsig usually avoids interviews, but gave this one for some reason and claimed it would be his last. It seems like it was. Maybe he agreed to it because Adams had read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance when he was 14, and Pirsig was one of his heroes. I don't know. In the write-up of the interview, Adams recounts the many lives of Robert Pirsig. There is the 9-year-old boy with the off-the-scale IQ of 170, trying to work out how to connect with his classmates in Minnesota. There is the young GI in Korea, picking up a curiosity for Buddhism while helping the locals with their English. There is the radical, manic teacher in Montana, making his freshmen sweat over a definition of quality. There is the homicidal husband sectioned into a course of electric shock treatment, designed to remove all traces of his past. There is the broken down father trying to bond with his son on a road trip. There is the best-selling author of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, offering solutions to the anxieties of a generation. And there is, for a good many years, the reclusive yachtsman trying to steer a course away from cultish fame. According to Adams, Pirsig's current motorcycle is a sailboat. He lives in rural New England and travels up to the islands of Maine with his wife on that boat, which he describes in his second book, Lila. It's perfectly maintained, of course. He lives these days in cyberspace, he says, where his ideas circulate. He plans to learn to tango and visit Buenos Aires. He's just discovered YouTube. He doesn't write anymore, though, and he hardly reads. Adams wondered if that old depression ever returns. I've been hit with it lately, Pirsig says. It didn't seem related to my life, though, in any way. I have money, fame, a happy wife, our daughter Nell. But I did, for the first time, go to a psychiatrist. He said it's a chemical imbalance, and he prescribed some pills, and the depression has gone. Otherwise, he says, he tries to live as best he can to the dictates of his dharma, to stay centered. I learned that Robert Redford once tried to buy the rights to his story, but Pirsig refused. His book has kind of taken on a life of its own, says Adams, and though parts feel dated, its quest for meaning still seems urgent. If Pirsig doesn't have it all figured out quite yet, not to worry. As it is written in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, sometimes it's a little better to travel than to arrive. We want to make good time, it says, but for us now, this is measured with the emphasis on good rather than on time. And if we don't have it figured out quite yet, and if we don't even have a motorcycle to help us, that's okay too. After all, says the narrator, the real cycle you're working on is a cycle called yourself. Amen, and blessed be.